The gate wasn't there when I went to bed. But at 5:52 the next morning, it was sitting across my gravel road, like it had grown out of the earth overnight. Black steel, fresh concrete, a keypad at eye level, and a little camera blinking red, like it was waiting for a show. The sign bolted to it said, "Authorized vehicles only," and right under that, like a punch to the throat, access fee $2 per month. I could have yanked that thing out with a chain in 30 seconds. You know what I mean. But that camera was the whole point, and instead of giving them a viral clip, I gave them court papers. And yeah, that happened. My name's Colton Briggs. I run a small cattle place outside Cedar Hollow County, Missouri. The kind of operation where your day starts before the sun and ends when the animals decide they're done with you. And my family's been on that ground long enough that I don't even think of it as property the way some folks do. It's just the work. It's the rhythm. It's responsibility. It's the thing you don't quit on because somebody else thinks your life is inconvenient. A few years back, a developer put a subdivision right up against my east fence line and called it Brightwood Reserve, all polished stone at the entrance, and neat little lanterns, and a pond with a fountain that sprays water like it's trying to prove something. And at first I didn't care. I waved when people walked their dogs. I kept my trailers tight to my side. I drove slow past their mailboxes. I tried to be the kind of neighbor that doesn't make anybody nervous. I honestly thought the biggest conflict I'd have with them would be someone complaining about the smell after a rain. But then the HOA showed up, and it didn't show up like a group of neighbors trying to get along. It showed up like a machine that needed a target. The first time their president knocked on my door, it was 6:07 a.m., and it wasn't a polite knock either. It was the kind of pounding that makes you think someone's hurt, or your barn is on fire. And when I opened it, there stood Melissa Crow, with her hair perfect sunglasses on, even though the sun wasn't up yet, and a clipboard held against her chest like it was a shield. She smiled without any warmth, and said, "Good morning, Mr. Briggs. I'm Melissa, HOA president for Brightwood Reserve," and I remember blinking at her and saying, "It's barely morning," because I didn't know what else to say. She didn't laugh. She just held up a paper and tapped it with her pen, like she was tapping a gavel. Notice of violation. Heavy vehicle noise during restricted hours. $500. I looked past her at my driveway. My truck was off, the keys weren't even in my pocket, and I said, "Ma'am, nothing's running." She gave me that little practiced smile, like she'd already won an argument we hadn't had yet, and said, "It will." Residents have complained we protect quality of life. I'd advise you to comply. It'll be easier for everyone. That phrase, easier for everyone, sounded soft, but it landed hard, because it wasn't advice, it was a warning with lipstick on it. I told her calm as I could manage, "I'm not in your HOA. I didn't sign your covenants," and she tilted her head like I was adorable for thinking that mattered. "Your activities still impact the community." And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be one annoying conversation. This was going to be a campaign. After that, it was paper. Dust complaints, traffic warnings, emails about community harmony. They hit me with a notice that said my hay bales were a visual disruption because they could be seen from their jogging trail. And I'm not proud of it. But I laughed out loud at my kitchen table like a man losing his mind. Because hay bales on a farm being called a visual disruption is the kind of thing you'd write as a joke if you wanted people to think you were exaggerating. But it wasn't a joke, it was real, and the fines started stacking up like they thought if they kept throwing numbers at me, I'd shrink. One morning, Melissa showed up at my fence line while my buddy Marcus and I were loading feed, and she didn't even bother with hello. She just said, "You can't run that truck during restricted hours." And Marcus looked at her, heels sinking into my dirt, and muttered, "Lady, the dirt doesn't recognize your authority." Melissa ignored him. Eyes locked on me and said, "We can escalate enforcement. Mr. Briggs, we can involve the county." When she said county, my stomach dropped, because that's the thing people don't understand if they've never been around it. You don't have to be right to cause damage, you just have to slow somebody down. A farm isn't a desk job. You can pause and pick back up next week's seasons. Don't wait. Animals don't care about bylaws, and buyers don't sit around while you resolve compliance issues. Not long after, a buyer I'd worked with for years called me, his voice calm and practical, and he said, "Colton, I can't keep shifting delivery windows. I've got my own margins. I gotta move on," and he wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse because it meant this wasn't personal. This was the quiet kind of loss that just shows up on a spreadsheet and ruins you. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with invoices spread out coffee cold, and I realized this wasn't about safety. It wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about harmony. It was about control, about whether a man in muddy boots had to ask permission to live his own life because someone with a clipboard decided it impacted the community. And once you understand that, you stop hoping the next meeting will fix it. You stop thinking compromise will be respected. You start looking for another way. That's when I remembered an old service track behind my south pasture, something my dad used to mention like a half-forgotten story. An old right-of-way that used to connect out to the state road before the subdivision ever existed. I dug out old plat maps, spent an evening squinting at lines and labels, and there it was, a dotted line where everyone else saw weeds. I called my daughter Lila. She's studying civil engineering at the community college, and she's got that kind of brain that sees structure where most people see mess. I told her what I found, and she didn't lecture me. She didn't ask why I was picking a fight. She just said, "Send me the files." Next day, she came out, walked the line with a survey pole, checked slope and drainage, and said, "We can do it, Dad, but do it right. Don't give them a story." That sentence stuck with me because that's what Melissa wanted from the beginning. A story. An angry farmer tearing down a gate, a guy refusing to follow rules, a clip they could pause on and say, "See, this is why we needed oversight." So, we did it right. Marcus brought his old dozer, the kind that looks like it survived 3 wars and still runs mean if you treat it decent. We cleared brush, hauled gravel, cut drainage, the way Lila told us to, and I worked myself to the bone for weeks. Hands shaking at night from machine vibration, shoulders burning dust stuck in my eyelashes. But there was something peaceful about it too, because I wasn't asking permission anymore. And the day I drove that road out to the highway for the first time, gravel crunching under the tires. No detour through Brightwood. No neighborhood cameras watching me like I was a criminal. I felt something unclench in my chest, like my life clicked back into alignment. I should have known that's exactly when they'd come for it. Tuesday morning before sunrise, I rounded the bend and slammed the brakes so hard my coffee sloshed onto the dash. There it was, a black steel gate stretched across my road posts, sunk into fresh concrete that hadn't even cured yet, a keypad bolted on like it belonged at a warehouse, and a small black camera angled perfectly toward a driver's face. The sign was clean in a way that felt insulting. Authorized vehicles only. Then managed by Access Bridge Solutions, LLC. And then that line that made my jaw go tight. Access FE 2 of per month. I just stood there a second staring at that blinking red light. Because 20 yards away in my barn, I had a chain and a tractor and all the power in the world to make that gate disappear. You know what I mean? 30 seconds low gear, steel posts popping out of wet concrete like bad teeth. Marcus rolled up behind me, got out, took one look and said, "Say the word." Lila walked up slower, her eyes scanning details the way she does when something matters, and she whispered, "Dad, they want you on video." She was right. And that was the moment my anger changed shape. I still felt it hot in my chest, but it cooled just enough to sharpen. Because that camera wasn't for security, it was bait. If I tore the gate down, I'd win 30 seconds and lose everything else. I'd be the headline, the villain, the unhinged landowner. So I didn't touch it. I pulled out a tape measure. I photographed everything. The bolts, the keypad sticker, the wet concrete, the exact wording on the sign, the angle of the camera. Lila filmed my hands while I measured steady and quiet. Marcus wrote down times. I turned my anger into evidence because I could feel it in my bones. This fight wasn't going to be loud, it was going to be paper. And sure enough, the gate didn't just block me, it triggered a whole chain of official-looking nonsense. By afternoon, there was a county pickup creeping along my property line, like it was sightseeing, then stopping, and two guys stepped out with clean boots and clipboards and polite faces. One of them said, "We've received reports about runoff concerns, just checking," and I showed them Lila's drainage cuts. The slope we engineered, the channels we carved, and he nodded like he understood. Took photos anyway, and left me with that word that ruins people without ever sounding like a threat pending. Then the calls started. A supplier hesitated on a delivery. We were told to hold until things clear up. A buyer stopped returning messages. Another buyer said, "I don't want to get mixed up in a dispute." And that's when I ran the numbers and realized I had about 8 days before my operation went from tight to broken. Because when you're small, a delay isn't an inconvenience. It's a blade you feel pressing into your throat. Meanwhile, Brightwood's HOA blasted residents with an email about temporary access controls, like they were heroes protecting the community from my terrible existence. And I heard later that in their private Facebook group, people were congratulating each other, saying things like, "Finally someone's taking action. And if he can't follow rules, maybe he shouldn't live here." Live here. On land my family's held longer than their fountain has existed. I got a call from a local radio host too, all cheerful and hungry, asking for a statement. And I wanted to talk, I really did. I wanted to tell everyone exactly what was happening. But Lila looked at me and said, "Dad, the moment you get loud, they get to call you emotional." And she was right. So I stayed quiet and did the one thing Melissa didn't expect. I started digging. I looked up the LLC on the sign. Access Bridge. Solutions LLC was brand new in the state registry, and the address wasn't a business park. It wasn't an office. It was a house in town. Lila pulled up the county parcel map, overlaid it, and her face went still. "Dad," she said, "that's Melissa Crow's mom's house." And that was the pivot, because suddenly the gate wasn't oversight. It was a toll booth, and the toll booth was tied to the HOA president's family. That night, we didn't celebrate. We didn't gloat. We got to work. We printed the registry, pulled the plat map showing the HOA boundary, stopped short of my road, and I called the county clerk's office with a calm voice and polite questions. And I found out the LLC had filed a request to reclassify the right-of-way, and the county denied it the same day. Denied same day, meaning they knew they had no authority, and they did it anyway. 2 nights later, someone hung a grocery bag on my fence. Inside was a USB drive and a small note that said, "Use a clean computer." No name, no explanation. Marcus and I opened it on an old laptop at his shop, and what was on it made my stomach go cold. HOA meeting minutes, internal emails, expense summaries, and one message in particular that felt like someone had spoken the quiet part out loud. If we restrict access long enough, Briggs will negotiate the fee structure, creates incentive to comply. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a plan. That's leverage. That's people sitting around a table deciding how to squeeze a living out of someone else's throat. My kitchen table turned into a war room. We built a timeline with dates and screenshots. We highlighted language. We matched HOA expense lines, labeled third-party services to the cost of the gate, and Lila kept saying the same thing like a mantra. They didn't build a gate, Dad. They built a system. That's when I called attorney Dana Whitlock. Dana's the kind of lawyer who doesn't show up with drama. She shows up with a yellow legal pad and a stare that makes liars start sweating. She read everything without blinking. Then she looked up and said, "We file an emergency injunction. We force discovery. You stay calm." I asked her, "What if they paint me as the problem?" Dana didn't even shrug. She just said, "Let them." Judges don't like schemes. Schemes leave footprints. 3 days later, we were in county court, the kind of courthouse that smells like old coffee and printer ink, with metal detectors that beep at belt buckles older than the deputies running them. Across the aisle sat the HOA attorney in a suit that probably cost more than my first truck, and behind him sat Melissa Crow, like she owned the room. Hands folded, chin lifted, eyes hard. Right before the hearing in the hallway, she leaned close and whispered, "You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Pay the fee, sign the access agreement, and it all goes away." I looked her in the eye and said, "What? No. What goes away is your side business." Inside the courtroom, Donna didn't perform. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't appeal to emotion. She just laid paper down like dominoes. The county plat map, the photos with timestamps, the denied reclassification request, filed by the LLC. The LLC registration tied to Melissa's mother's address. HOA expense lines, paying third-party services. And then the printed emails from the USB drive, highlighted where they talked about restricting access to forced negotiation. The HOA attorney started singing his song, misunderstanding safety temporary measures, and Dana let him talk until the judge asked for the next exhibit. Then the judge looked straight at Melissa, not the lawyer Melissa, and asked Crow, "Do you have any financial relationship with Access Bridge Solutions, LLC?" Melissa said. And Dana placed one last page down, a transfer record and email trail tying access revenue back to Melissa's family account. And the room went quiet the way it does when a lie runs out of air. The judge didn't yell. She didn't slam anything. She just said, "Daddy, that is not a misunderstanding. That is a scheme." And then she turned to the HOA attorney and said, "Counsel, sit down." I'll never forget that, because in one sentence, she removed all the power they thought they had. She ordered the gate removed within 48 hours, barred the HOA from asserting jurisdiction over my road, granted damages for disruption, and referred the matter for investigation and a full audit of HOA funds. Melissa's face drained like someone pulled the plug. For the first time since this started, I felt that shift in my body from bracing to breathing, not because I was happy, but because I wasn't being managed anymore. 2 mornings later, a county flatbed rolled up to my road. Workers unloaded a generator, fired up a concrete saw. Sparks jumped, concrete. Cracked bolts gave, and that big black gate sagged and dropped onto the truck with a final dull thud. No speeches, no apologies, no HOA email, taking accountability. Just steel leaving my land like it never belonged there in the first place. Sunlight ran clean down my gravel like it had been waiting, and not long after a delivery truck eased through the driver, lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in that small rural wave that says, "Good to see you back where you belong." And here's where the story gets messy, because it didn't end with everyone clapping and admitting they were wrong. A week later, Brightwood held a special meeting, and I started hearing the same people who cheered order now whispering, well, Colton went too far, like exposing a toll scam is rude because it embarrasses the neighborhood. I even heard someone wanted to complain about the judge for being anti-community. Not Melissa for running a scheme, the judge for stopping it. And that's the part that sticks in my throat, because it tells you how deep this stuff goes. Some people would rather protect the illusion of harmony than admit they were being used. Also, nobody ever told me who dropped that USB drive. Whoever it was took a risk, and I still wonder if they're living next to folks who smile in public and punish in private. So I want to ask you something, and I'm not asking it like it's a simple question, because it's not. If you were paying HOA dues, and you found out your HOA president was funneling money through a family-linked LLC, would you want the truth, even if it made your neighborhood look bad? Or would you rather blame the guy in muddy boots because it's easier than admitting you got played? And if you were me, would you have ripped that gate down on day one? Or do you think the real win is keeping your temper, letting the paper speak, and watching the truth do the damage while they sit there waiting for you to explode? Drop your take in the comments. I mean, really tell me where you land, because people are split on this stuff, and I've seen it up close now. And if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA, or a board, or anyone who tried to sell you rules that were really just control, share your story too, because I guarantee you're not alone. And if you think nobody should have to pay a toll to reach their own land, hit like, subscribe, and let's talk about what community is supposed to mean when someone starts using it as a weapon.